What is good to stuff, family? It's Ray J back with another video, and this one I'm going to break down what's going on with the overall market, what you should be watching for moving forward. I'm going to talk about what Jerome Powell just said that's very important for the entire stock market and Tesla, and what the technicals are suggesting for SPY, Nvda, the QQQ, and many tickers out there like Tesla, based off what the news is saying and based off what we're seeing. But before I break things down about all this information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I'm firstly not a financial planner, so make sure you take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends in just 7 days, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. All right, so in my video from yesterday, I predicted a big move in the morning for Tesla, followed by some sideways price action approaching Powell, then bigger volatility once the guy started speaking. Now, in my video from the morning, I predicted that Tesla would get a nice bounce and then a drop in sideways price action. That's very similar to what happened, but not exact, because once Powell started speaking, we didn't really get that big of a move from Tesla, but we did get a bigger move on SPY. But the real question is, why did the market move the way it did? Why did we see the market like pump like crazy, and then you see this big dump afterwards, and then end up just continuing to trade sideways after that? What did Powell say? What is so important, and how made the market move tomorrow because of all of this? I'm going to answer those questions later on in this video, but first let's talk about the market, what's going on with it. So we just had Meta's earnings. They did better than expected when it came to their overall results for EPS and revenue, and they're very optimistic when it comes to their next quarter. That is very bullish for them. They're up almost 7% at the time of recording this. Very, very good stuff for Meta, which is good for the markets for tomorrow. Now, for data coming out for tomorrow, we have some GDP numbers, the GDP growth rate quarter over quarter, another development for Q2. And we also have initial jobless claims and some jobs numbers coming out in the morning. Now, this is going to be especially important after the things that Jerome Powell just said. So we want this to be very close to expectations, especially jobless claims right over here. Now, we want this to be very close to what the consensus happens to be. We want this to be very close. If it's too low, this is going to be a little bearish for the markets. If it's decent, it's going to be completely fine. And if it's too high, we could see a very nuanced reaction. Same thing with initial jobless claims. This is going to be one of the most important ones. Now, Jerome Powell said that there's going to be pain in the jobs sector, and the Fed is after it right now, looking at it, and they want to see once again, more and more contraction, and that is what they're basically anticipating going into the next couple of months. They mentioned it's very important for the fight against inflation, and it's very important for them to maintain a restrictive policy as a result of the current numbers. But I will talk more about Powell in just a few minutes. Let's first talk about this. We have Meta and Chipotle announcing earnings. Meta is doing relatively well right now, which is going to help the market, but once again, Jerome Powell's words will have another effect on them. Before the market opens tomorrow, we have Royal Caribbean Group, we have McDonald's, Southwest, MasterCard, and just a couple of others. Then after the market closes, we have Ford, Intel, that's going to be a big one. Intel's going to be pretty big, and Roku as well, all announcing earnings. This is going to be very interesting, so make sure you're ready for these. And these will have an effect on the market going into the next day for Friday. So it's going to be a very interesting Friday, as we also have PCE data coming out, and all of this will affect the market moving forward. But the question is now, what did Powell say? What did Powell say, and how could this affect the markets? Well, Powell was just all over the place, in my opinion. Some things he said were bullish, other things were bearish, and he continued to remain very ambiguous. There's a lot of ambiguity associated with his words, lots of uncertainty, and this will affect the market in different ways. So let's first talk about this right here. Powell implied that there is a good chance they're going to continue to raise rates, but this will depend heavily on lots of data to come out over the next couple of weeks slash months. In my opinion, I don't know exactly, what this will cause for the markets, because it's just, once again, he doesn't know what's going to happen. He's changing his stance and becoming less certain, and this is leading to more uncertainty in the markets, which could, have a very strange reaction. Now, he also said some very, very bullish things and very bearish things at the same time, going back and forth and back and forth. He was very much all over the place looking at what he just said. He said that core inflation is still elevated, which is like bearish. He said that the Fed has to hold rates high for some time, but then he also said that it's very probable we could get a soft landing. So that was like bullish, so some bullish and bearish things. Then he also said that inflation is resilient, but at the same time, he said that the Fed is no longer forecasting a recession. So that's some very bullish news. And then he also said that inflation is still very hot despite that, and they have to remain restrictive. So he was kind of all over the place, but he did say something very big, and that is that the Fed is not forecasting a recession. That's a very, very big change, and one of the most significant things he said. This was making all sorts of headlines. And when Powell said that, when he said that the Fed is not going to be forecasting a recession, we saw the market just take off. Look at how SPY ran. It ran all the way from the 454s all the way up to almost 457 in just an instant, very, very quickly. And this was very, very interesting to watch. But then Powell said something that caused the market to get a rug pull. And when he speaks, like I said, this guy can move the market like crazy. Powell then said, so remember, he said some bullish things, some bearish things, and he said one very bullish thing, which was the fact that the Fed is not forecasting a recession. Then he said he does not see inflation coming back to 2% until about 2025. The Fed will not be cutting rates this year, and they have to remain as restrictive as possible for longer. And he mentioned that there's a lot of work that has to be done. So he also said this, which was quite bearish. He's saying that it's going to take a while to get inflation down. He said core inflation is too high, and there's a lot of work that has to be done. And that caused the market to get this rug pull all the way down to 453 before getting bought right back up to barely close green, then dropping in the after hours. So very, very mixed stuff. I mean, there's no clear direction, in my opinion. Sometimes when Powell would speak, he would just be like hawkish, 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 and we would know what would happen the next day. Other times the guy would speak and he would just be dovish and it would help the market pump. This time he said some things that could pump the market and tank the market back and forth and back and forth. It was very mixed. A lot of things he said were kind of bullish, other things not so much. So very mixed. And I will break down maybe some levels to watch for now going into tomorrow because of this. But for some tickers in particular, I'm leaning more bullish. It's just that for the whole market, we could get a very mixed response based off what he said. I will talk about that in just a few minutes now. Let's talk about Tesla. Tesla's under investigation by California. Right now, you could see the Attorney General is just talking about the autopilot safety. This is the same thing that just keeps going on. This is worth noting. This is not some good news for them. This just came out. There was also talk about a recall for some of their vehicles, about 1,300 of them, over some front camera issue. There's a misalignment, but it's not really that big of a deal. That's just only 1,300 cars, and that's why Tesla ended up gapping down in the morning. For now, Tesla's still trying to hold up, but we will see how the whole market responds. And I do think even Tesla's going to be impacted this time around. Now, as far as their inventory levels go, we're seeing the Model X going up in inventory, whereas most of these are actually on a slight downtrend from the Model S to the Model Y. So some very, very mixed looking data so far. We are starting to see some nice sales for the Model Y in particular. And this is one of the most popular models. So it's no surprise to see this continuing to blow up in the USA. Now, looking at the volume, we still have some nice volume. 95 million is not bad for Tesla. It is slowing down a little bit, which is part of why Tesla is becoming very choppy, very sideways as we're getting this balance between buyers and sellers. But overall, there's not high volume, there's not aggressive buying as of right now on Tesla. And we need some kind of news catalyst to cause this thing to pump to the upside. But if the opposite were to happen, if we get more bad news, the majority of headlines have been against Tesla, in my opinion, from getting downgrades to investigations to recalls that just keep on being announced. So there's a chance this could slow Tesla down a little bit, but we'll see what happens tomorrow morning with the new headlines. But for now, volume is slowing down, which is not the best of signs. It's still like okay, it's still at a pretty decent place, but it's slowing down just a little bit. And then looking at the short volume, this is actually down a little bit more, which is a decent sign. It's slowing down a little bit. We're not seeing as much heavy shorting, at least on that end. But for the overall short interest, we are seeing a big difference, which I will talk about in a second. Let me just mention that Thursdays tend to be green days about 47% of the time. They tend to be relatively weak days for Tesla. And besides that, the second and fourth hours are the two most important ones. Some news came out that Morgan Stanley gave Tesla an equal weight rating, saying it's going to perform equally with the market, which is pretty fine for Tesla so far. The price price ratio is dropping a little bit more, which is showing some relative weakness for Tesla. And last but not least, for the short interest, this is declining just a little bit. We're not seeing as much heavy shorting, but the overall short interest is a little bit higher than before. So it's very mixed. They're not shorting like aggressively, but they are slowing down a little bit at the same time. But overall, when it comes to like the total amount of shares shorted, it's a little bit higher than before. So it's kind of all over the place too. This has led us to slowing down a little bit, but it's not that bad because they're not being aggressive right now. Now, anyways, let's talk about the market, what's going on with it, and how on earth may all this data affects Tesla. Well, let's first talk about what's going on with SPY. So for tomorrow, I can't really predict exactly how this is going to go. I would lean a tiny bit more bullish since Powell and the Fed announced they're not really forecasting a recession, but Powell did say things about how inflation is too stubborn and the Fed has to remain restrictive until quite a while. So we're just going to have to be very patient for the time being. But let me just mention that For now, the market's holding up quite decently. And I do believe we're going to see the market try to hold up again tomorrow. Lots of like mixed responses. And I'm not really expecting anything too insane. We will see how the market tries to move based off what they think Powell is going to do. Because Powell was saying things which, once again, were bullish and bearish. So it's very, very mixed. If we're more bullish, right, you're going to be watching our resistance around this 456 area. If that breaks, we have 457 as our next resistance, 457.5 around that area, then 458. For support, you're going to be watching 455 flats, 454.5, 454, 453.5, followed by the 452s. Watch these levels very carefully. We can actually watch these zones. Be very careful as well when playing SPY tomorrow. I want to mention that we don't know how the market's going to respond to all of this. There's a good chance it's going to try to hold up things to Meta's earnings. But like I said before, I mean, the media could choose one thing that Powell said to just drop off of, or the complete opposite could happen. So, for example, let's just say the media looks at this news and this makes all the headlines. Powell is saying this, the market could tank because of that. But what if the media starts to talk more about this? What if this makes more headlines about how the Fed is saying that, oh, there's a decreased possibility of there being a recession? That could also pump the markets. So it's very, very ambiguous, very, very unpredictable at this point. That's why I'm talking about both sides. For now, we're just going to be watching it carefully just to see what the real response is going to be. Now, for Tesla, this thing is very tight right now, so I'm going to be anticipating a nice move. If we're bullish, you're going to be watching 268. If it breaks above 265, we're going to be watching 268, 270, 272, and then 275. For support, watch $262 a share, followed by 260, and then 258 below that. From a technical standpoint, this is looking like Tesla's on the verge of trying to find a bottom here around this 261 area. And it's trying to bounce off of this and try to hold around this area to form a base. So we're going to be watching this 260 area. I think it could retest this 260 and try to bounce off of it. But then also remember, we're going to wait and see how big of a move it makes, as it's getting very, very tight right now. And we're going to see which direction it breaks in. This depends on the news coming out for tomorrow and how the market responds to Powell. I can't really predict it right now in as much confidence compared to like other predictions I had on Tesla. So for now, we're just going to be patient, but I will give you guys more predictions in the future once we get more insights. Now, if you look at NEO is pumping like crazy. We have a bullish triangle developing on it. And I called out NEO many weeks ago. I told you I'm very bullish on NEO. If you look at NEO, this thing has been blasting off since. I've been talking about this since this thing was in the sevens. Now it's at 13. And on top of this, we have a nice accumulation structure building. As long as they give us strong deliveries for August, this thing is going to fly, in my opinion, all the way up to at least 15 a share. And if that breaks, I mean, we could see it get to about 22 a share. That's another possibility for the next couple of weeks. But it really depends on like data, right? It depends on their numbers. So far, they're looking very optimistic. I do have a target of 22, possibly if we get some good numbers from them. It is a real possibility. NEO's looking quite good. For Aapl, we're very tight right now, not really doing much. It's looking a little bit more bullish though compared to the market because of this nice potential inverse head and shoulder structure that has been developing. I think on the 30-minute time frame, it looks a little bit better. So there's a possible inverse head and shoulders, a nice accumulation that is forming. If we're bullish, we want to see this thing break above 194.5. If it gets well above that, you're going to be watching for 196 to be retested. And a break above that, we have 198. I think it looks more bullish. It looks like it may retest 196, but just to be safe, we have to see what the reaction is to Powell. For support, watch 194, 193.25, 193 flats, then the 192s. What do I think is more likely? It looks more bullish respecting an uptrend. I think the odds favor upside, but just to be safe, we're going to be watching both sides. For the triple Q, if you're bullish, you want to see it break above this imbalance around this 380 area to be tested. And if it breaks that, 382 and 385 could come. If you're bearish, you want to see it break below 376, retest 375, 374.34, then 373 for the gap fill. What is it looking like? It looks a little bit more bullish as we have a possible inverse head and shoulders structure developing right about here. And we have a nice accumulation simultaneously from a Wyckoffean perspective. So what this tells us is we have like a head right here, a left shoulder, and then a possible right shoulder that developed when Powell was speaking. The odds do favor upside for the triple Q, but we have to watch it break and hold above the resistance right here at this 380 area for confirmation. But always be open-minded because you never know how the market's going to respond to Powell. I'm just saying it's looking a little bit more bullish on this chart in particular. Nvda also looks more bullish, in my opinion, based off the overall structure. However, just wait to see what the reaction is to Jerome Powell first before making any conclusions. So if we're bearish after Powell, you're going to be watching 450 as support, 444 is the next major support below that. Well, actually, there's 446, then 444, and then below that, you have 440. If we're bullish, you want to see this thing break above 460. If that breaks, we could make our way all the way up to about this 466 area, or very close to that. Then we have like this 468 to 470. Then after that, it could get very close to 480. All right, so those are support and resistance levels. What do I think is more likely for Nvidia? In my opinion, this chart is looking more bullish overall. So this is like if we ignore Jerome Powell, just forget about Powell and everything else outside of it. It looks more bullish. It looks like a nice accumulation structure, a nice inverse head and shoulders like the QQQ. I think the odds favor a nice push up to get very close to this like 480 area. But could this thing like gap down tomorrow and then just try to bounce later? That's a possibility. It looks very nice. It looks more bullish. But just to be safe, watch for confirmation just to be safe. Looking at Microsoft, if we're bullish on Microsoft, you want to see this thing hold above 340. Now, if you're bearish, you want to see it break below 335 to retest 333. My gut tells me it's going to try to make its way up to about this imbalance area around this 342 area. The odds favor that. But just to be safe, we're going to be watching for how the market responds to Meta's earnings and Jerome Powell speaking. For AMD, you want to see this thing break above this resistance right here around this 112 area to fill this imbalance. If it manages to break 112 and get above the 200 EMA on 3-minute time frame, it could push all the way up to about 114.5 to 115. If it breaks below 109, you're going to be watching 107 and 105 as supports. How is it looking from a technical standpoint? In the middle, it's very, very sideways right now, not really giving us a true direction. So we're just going to have to wait and see on that. I'm just going to go over a couple of others. Let me just mention the dollar has a bearish looking structure, which would be technically bullish for the markets as we have like a head and shoulders formation and we're forming a distribution phase. And we have these imbalances down here. There's another one down here at 100.72. If it breaks below the low at 100.8, it's going to come all the way down to 100.7, which could help the markets pump. The odds do favor upside in the markets, but just to be safe, we have to wait for confirmation. We have to see how the market responds to Powell just to be safe. For Google, we want to see this thing try to break and hold these levels around this 130 area. It looks like it may cool off a little bit more since this thing pumped like crazy thanks to earnings. It may retest like 128 and try to bounce, so just be very careful with that. But overall, it's holding up quite nicely. If we get a very negative response to Powell, it could break below 128 and start dropping towards like 125. If we get a good response, it could retest 128 then bounce. So we're going to be watching those levels very carefully. For Amazon, right now, it's looking quite nice in my opinion. It got a big drop after the lawsuit was announced. However, it does have a possibility of forming kind of like a left shoulder and a head, and it could be reversing very soon since it formed this nice divergence. But just to be safe, we want to be patient. We want to see how long it takes. And if we truly get confirmation of this bounce, there's a possibility it's going to bounce. But we want to see it break above like around 130-ish, very close to 130. If it gets above it, it's going to start bouncing to the upside and make its way up to 131 plus. But that's going to be our confirmation. If you're bearish, you want to see it break below 128 and make its way down to this low right here to about 126. If that fails us, it's going to come down to like another low and break down to below 125. So watch for confirmation. And finally, for Meta, it's up 7.65%, continuing to pump to the upside, looking very nice. My gut was telling me to hold calls. I ended up not doing it just to be safe, but it's completely fine because I'm not really too mad or salty about it. Anyways, when it comes to Meta, it's completely fine. It's holding it very nicely. I honestly don't like to play earnings way too much, so I'm completely fine with not playing it. But there's going to be opportunity tomorrow to play just based off what we see. It looks like it wants to retest 325. If that breaks, I'm going to be watching this 330 area as its resistance. And then we have to go back to the daily to talk about something else. Let me just mention that on the daily, this is what it's looking like so far. It's actually up at these very high levels. I may actually have to go back to the weekly just to show you what I'm talking about. So on the weekly, it's getting very close to 330. If that breaks on it, I mean, we have some resistance. Our next like really heavy resistance is going to be a lot closer to about this 338 area, and then we have 353 next. If it gets above like 340, we could be going for 353. There's a chance Meta could pump that hard as it has a very bullish looking structure so far coming up to this imbalance. It looks quite nice. So it's a very, very nice looking cup and handle that could be developing on it. Looks quite bullish, and we're going to be watching to see if this thing can try to get above 330. If that breaks, the 340 or very close to 340 could come. And above that, it's going to likely go for this resistance at 353. It looks more bullish after earnings with strong guidance. That's a good sign for Meta. And for now, we're just going to be watching these charts carefully. So as far as my predictions go, just to be safe and clear, I have been giving you some predictions and some projections on Nvidia and Meta. And most of these stocks, I have been leaning more like either like bullish or bearish, depending on what the chart was telling us. But for just a couple of them, such as SPY, I'm not as decisive because just looking at the chart, it is a little indecisive too. And it depends on how the market responds to Jerome Powell. So this is a very unique situation, which is why I'm not just as certain about some of these, even for like Tesla. So the best thing to do is just be very patient and watch your levels carefully. And I will talk more about the levels tomorrow based off the data that comes out for tomorrow, and also based off how the market chooses to respond to Powell. All right, so until I see you guys again, thank you all so much for listening. Have an absolutely spectacular rest of the day. Tesla and the market to the moon as long term is still very bright, and peace out.